Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Mind Matters, navigating head injuries and concussions. Today we're joined by one of our seasoned senior attorneys with our concussion and brain injury group, Thomas Oswald. Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here.
Today we're focusing on a fascinating and innovative tool that's really making waves in the diagnosis and treatment of traumatic brain injury. It's called the Healix blood test. So today we're going to explore how this test works, what it measures, how it's being used in real life cases. Plus, we're going to discuss some of the legal implications of using a test like this in personal injury cases. So let's jump right in. Start off, Thomas, talk about what TBI is. Can you kind of explain it in simple terms?
Sure. Traumatic brain injury, TBI, happens when there's a bump, blow, or jolt to the head that disrupts normal brain function. So if you imagine your brain's like a soft jello inside of a hard shell, when that shell gets hit, the jello can get shaken around, leading to injuries.
That's actually a really good analogy. So are car crashes a common cause of traumatic brain injury?
Yeah, absolutely. In a car crash, sudden stop or impact can cause the brain to move violently inside the skull, and that can lead to bruising, bleeding, or other damage.
I know just from my experience as a registered nurse working with, patients that have had, brain injuries, diagnosing and treating traumatic brain injuries can be, really challenging, to be honest. And, so what are some of the obstacles that you've seen?
One of the biggest challenges is that TBIs can be hard to detect. Sometimes the symptoms don't appear right away. And you can have traditional methods like CT scans or MRIs. They might not catch all the damage, especially with milder cases.
This is where something like the Healix blood test will come in, right? Can you kind of explain how that particular test works? So let's talk about it in a way a fifth grader could understand it.
So if you imagine this Healix blood test as a detective, when someone gets a TBI, their brain releases certain proteins and molecules into the blood. You can think of those like clues at the crime scene, right? So the Healix test looks for these clues in the blood. And if it finds them, it can tell doctors that there's been a brain injury.
Actually, a really good explanation. So what does the Healix blood test measure?
So specifically, it measures these biomarkers, right? And biomarkers are substances in the blood that can indicate brain injury. Two of these key biomarkers are I don't know if they call it the GFAP or the GFAP. GFAP sounds a little funnier, so we'll go with that. And then the UCH-L1. You can think of them like fingerprints that will show up when the brain is injured.
I guess where you're going there, detectives, fingerprints. That's pretty good. You're exactly right. That's again, well done there. All right, so you're a lawyer. So tell me about how, give me some examples of how this test might be used in a real legal case.
So in a recent case, you have a car crash victim who has no visible injuries on a CT scan, a pretty common occurrence, but they're experiencing severe headaches and confusion. The Healix blood test, it detected high levels of brain injury biomarkers, which, traditional scans don't turn up. They don't get down to that level. But that led to the medical professionals being able to have a quick and accurate diagnosis of TBI. And this allowed them to start the appropriate treatment right away.
That is key, getting to that treatment quickly. And I think you're going to touch on that in a little bit. That's really an impressive example of how important something like this Healix blood test is going to be in future cases and treatment. So are there any institutions that are kind of regularly or currently using this blood test?
I think it's starting to move in that direction. It's starting to become something that is, we might have wide acceptance at some point in the future. It would be good for hospitals to be able to put that into their diagnostic protocols for traumatic brain injury, particularly where you have something like CT scans. It's going to show if you have a major traumatic brain injury or a moderate traumatic brain injury, maybe, with a brain bleed or some other artifact of injury that's left after a crash. But for the cases that don't rise to that level, which is probably the overwhelming majority of traumatic brain injury, could really help.
Yeah. I think we've talked on previous podcasts about kind of the insidiousness of the mild traumatic brain injury, which to your point is probably the most common type of TBI you see. It can be so difficult to detect those. So I'm I'm really excited to see something like the Healix blood test coming on the scene, and institutions like Johns Hopkins, really kind of leading the way in developing, like you said, the protocols and policies of where and when and how this should be used. So I'd really like to kind of hear more from you about how some of these institutions are really using this blood test and what, future applications we might be able to see from that.
I think a way that you could see these blood tests start to be adopted in a wide scale sort of manner is when somebody's involved in a crash or some sort of other occurrence that implicates head injury. They go to the emergency room. When they go in and there's signs and symptoms of a head injury, or someone's reported that they struck their head, or there's a large acceleration deceleration force, there'd be quick administration of this test to look for the biomarkers, the GFAP and UCH-L1. And that could allow the medical team to identify those brain injuries that might not be visible on those initial scans. Again, you're not seeing a lot of CT scans with results, but that doesn't mean that somebody hasn't damaged their head. It just means, hey, maybe we're not looking for the right thing. So those test results could help doctors make faster decisions about further imaging or treatments, including like vestibular therapy or just some sort of concussion therapy, and possibly lead to just more of those sorts of treatment protocols becoming available to people. If we can find out, hey, we're having more people having these traumatic brain injuries. We know these are missed at the hospital, according to the CDC's statistics. If we can do something early on in the process, maybe we can save, both clients and patients pain and suffering, but we can also lower the costs on basically the medical costs, throughout the country, by improving these patient outcomes, not having people end up with, permanent mild traumatic brain injuries. We could also look at using this blood test in follow-up care. So what's particularly cool about this blood test is that, somebody comes into the emergency room, they're suffering from, traumatic brain injury symptoms. They give in that Healix test at the beginning and you're getting a baseline. And then as you kind of progress and you're moving through your treatment path, you're given that Healix test during the checkups. And in that sense, you can a specialist could track the progress of the injury and adjust the treatment plans as needed. So you could see, well, these proteins and your old buddy GFAP, he's starting to be lowered and not show up in the bloodstream as much. And, that's a good thing. Whatever we're doing is working, or the injury is healing itself. Yeah, there's still a lot of research to be done on this in terms of the Healix test. It's relatively new in the grand scheme of things. And I think more data and more trials are going to help be able to fit it into a place where it can be refined to be used in the clinical practice.
So much cool stuff there. I mean, I could, again, being an RN, I could geek out on that stuff all day long. I think I've read some since I, found out this is what we were talking about today. I'll be honest, I didn't know a whole lot about the Healix test. I'd read where they're starting to use blood testing for TBI, and I've seen kind of like we've talked about in previous episodes where sports, the military, that's kind of where that stuff started, where they started doing that research into, because you see a lot of TBI in those two sectors, obviously. So finally glad to see it starting to trickle down to where us regular people get to use that, kind of refine it a little bit. So I'm just super excited about it. So we've got you, keen legal mind. Let's kind of shift gears into the legal aspect of it. All right. So talk about some of the legal implications of using the Healix blood test in a personal injury case.
It can be a game changer. And, we use that word sometimes, but this is what I would look at as kind of a true game changer, because one of the things that it provides the attorney and the jury and any fact finder to look at in a crash or accident of some sort is that you've got objective scientific evidence of a brain injury. And that can be crucial in proving the extent of the harm that's suffered by the victim. And that actually, for years and years, the insurance industry love concussion cases because all they could say is, well, show me the money. Like, show me how you're actually, how do we actually know you're having a concussion versus you just saying, oh, my head hurts. Remove that from the spectrum of arguments that defense attorneys and insurance company can use to basically try to damage your case and avoid paying the money that they're obligated to pay. So, and if we have objective evidence, that can influence compensation that's awarded for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and other damages.
I focus a lot on the health and recovery aspect of things, but this is a legal case we're talking about here with our clients, right? We want them to get better, we want them to get healthier, but we also want them to be taken care of, on the legal side of things. So how can this this test really kind of impact a personal injury claim, and maybe in ways that other methodologies or things may be able to or may not be able to, right? The data doesn't lie, they say, right? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a way when an insurance adjuster or a defense attorney says, hey, you're faking it, is you can just look and be like, wrong. So, this is clear evidence of a traumatic brain injury, even if those traditional imaging tests were inconclusive like they often are. And this can strengthen our client's case and increase the likelihood of a favorable settlement and verdict. So it's just a way to prove what we know has happened based on our client's credibility, which we believe in our clients. And, we don't see clients who lie. I'm sure there are some out there, but, we don't bring those cases if we think someone's lying. We know that they're telling the truth if we bring our case forward. It enhances what our clients kind of, what we would call before and after witnesses are saying, because some of the most powerful witnesses in these cases are the people who live with the client. A lot of times the client doesn't really know how they've been affected because, it's kind of there's a strange thing. It's just this strange, mysterious, wonderful creation. And it's like, you don't know what you were like before to some extent. I can't tell you the kind of clients, I know kind of what I was like, but I don't remember the way I felt. So I feel different. I know something's different, but I can't tell you exactly what I was like before. But their wife can, the mailman can, the checkout person at the food line they go to every week can. So, those things like all kind of fit together to be able to help our cases.
I love that. I love how you talk about, our clients' loved ones, their friends, their people in their sphere, right? Being such an important part of this. That's so important. So thank you for talking about that. So kind of want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the treatment side, really. So this test, again, one of the things that I'm excited so much about for something like this is that early diagnosis piece, right? The earlier we can diagnose this, the earlier we can treat it, which obviously is going to give us more favorable outcomes, right? Maybe we can avoid some of the heartaches down the road that come along with a TBI. So let's talk about that. Early diagnosis and diagnosis and treatment, it's essential in these cases, right?
Yeah, I think you can have these types of tests happen later down the road, of course, and the experts can explain to you how they still have relevance and how they can still show that there was an injury. But if you have a more established sort of pattern of doing these, like if you have one at the beginning of the case, within the first week or so, you have one a couple weeks later or a couple months later, whatever the treating physicians are recommending, you almost have a timeline. It's like a timeline of how biologically your brain responded to this trauma and the rest of your body responded to this trauma with these different biomarkers, and you can chart that out and show, hey, if you have one later in the game, maybe you're looking at that, so you have one 6 months after a crash. Like, well, maybe that's due to other reasons. But if you have this at the beginning and you can chart that over the course of the case, it's obviously going to be more effective than the alternative. But that's not to say the alternative doesn't have value.
We could go on and on about this. I love this kind of stuff, but this has been a really, really enlightening discussion, Thomas. Thank you. So to kind of sum it up, we've learned about the challenges of diagnosing and treating a traumatic brain injury, and some of the really innovative approaches, things like the Healix blood test are bringing us, and, its significant legal implications in personal injury cases.
Yeah, and it's been great talking with you about it. Look forward to talking more about this specific subject as it continues to be more widely adopted throughout the medical system. And yeah, there's a lot of applications for it, and it's kind of seeing the market work. It's one of those phrases that you hear sometimes, seeing the market work. It's once you get billion-dollar industries involved in having a stake in something. If you're talking about the NFL with head injuries, and you're talking about the military, you think about how much money flows there. It's finally the little people get to benefit from some of these big actors' investments. So it's a good thing.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you, Thomas, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. Thank you to our listeners for tuning into Mind Matters. Remember, please hit that like and subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications. And as always, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.